Alright, I am back with another video, and today we're doing the what if build that you all saw coming pretty much since I started doing these types of builds. We all knew that this build was going to happen, as it's probably one of the most explicit statements of a change in class for any character in this game, and that is Ranger Wyll. So obviously, spoilers for one of the endings and some of the epilogue of Baldur's Gate 3 moving forward, but that kind of spoiler warning prelude is going to end in 3, 2, 1. Now we're talking about spoilers. So, if Wyll decides to is able to break his pact with Mizora, and if he kind of just wanders the land free or goes to Avernus with Karlach, he will become a Ranger. Now for Wyll, I think this is quite an interesting and fun change. It brings a whole new dynamic and kind of idea to his character that I really appreciate, especially with the fact that even though he has completely been able to break free from Mizora, he still has the scars of his pact, as you can see the devil horns here, and even so he is still tied to Avernus if he decides to go with Karlach. And I decided to reflect that in kind of like the leveling scheme and the kind of choices with the armor here. As you can see, I've kind of gone for that like almost Karlach-esque vibe to it with, like, you know, the armor and such like that, because that is pretty similar to the armor he wears in the epilogue if he kind of goes down that route. So this can kind of work. I think this is mainly working for the kind of Avernus ending for Wyll, but it could also work for the kind of more general like monster hunter vibe that he goes for if he doesn't go for to Avernus. So I think this build works quite nicely. But I really wanted to keep to the essence of Wyll's character. As we know, Wyll is kind of this like very impressive, you know, rapier duelist who can dance around his opponents and strike with precision and power. So I wanted to capture and reflect that here. So I'm kind of doing a finesse, like kind of high power ranger build, which I think is going to be really fun, and I think you'll agree that the choices that I go with for this build are going to be pretty on point. So I hope you guys enjoy this one, as this was a highly anticipated build for this channel. So let's get into it. First off, we are actually going to be starting off as a rogue. Obviously we are going to be taking ranger levels pretty quick, but starting with rogue is going to get us a bunch of things that I actually do really want for this build. We can either start as ranger or rogue, it doesn't really matter. However, ranger is going to give us pretty much all of the armor and weapon proficiencies we want just from multi-classing anyway. You pretty much get the same like weapon and armor proficiencies multi-classing into ranger than you would when you don't. Also, starting off with rogue is going to give us a bunch of skill proficiencies, as I've already said, as well as the fact that if we multi-class into ranger later, all of our items are going to use wisdom instead of intelligence for like spell save DCs if there's like magic effects attached to them. So it actually makes the most sense to start with rogue. There's pretty much no downside to it, so that's what we're going to be doing. Starting off as rogue, obviously, like I said, skill proficiencies as well as the ability to use sneak attack. Sneak attack is actually going to be quite fun for this build. Again, if we're taking Wyll as this fighter who goes for precise deadly strikes, then sneak attack does actually make sense in kind of a mid-combat sense. We're going to get some other abilities to really power up kind of single strike attacks with Wyll as well in the future, so getting sneak attack as a starting point is great. So I think rogue at level 1 actually works out pretty good for us. Next up, for our ability scores, we've got a pretty standard spread for this type of character. Dexterity at 16, Constitution at 14, Wisdom at 16 because of ranger stuff, and then Charisma at 12, because I wanted, even though Wyll is not a charisma-focused character anymore, I don't think any of that like would just completely go away. I do think he still will have a little bit of like, you know, panache and can be like a bit of a party face and something and such like that. But I definitely think if he spent enough time away from Baldur's Gate and the like, he may have kind of not exactly lost touch with his people skills, but definitely would have probably become slightly more isolated and maybe doesn't have like a maxed out charisma score anymore, but that charm is definitely still there. As for our skill proficiencies, oh boy, do we have a lot to pick from. Obviously, Wyll is a human, and with his origin kind of already being decided, you don't actually get to change his human proficiency. But it does come with persuasion, which, to be honest, is probably what I would have picked anyway. I've also gone for expertise and persuasion, so he can still be the face of the party. Again, still getting that kind of charisma-based character vibe, as well as picking up deception, intimidation. We get animal handling and survival because Wyll is a folk hero. Also, I'm going to pick up acrobatics because I felt like that just kind of made sense, and being able to resist being shoved is nice, again with that kind of fleet of foot dance around our enemies type, so acrobatics does make sense here. And also, what rogue isn't complete without stealth? I feel like if you are going to be going for, you know, monster hunts and, you know, travels through Avernus, you're going to want to make sure that, yes, you actually can strike before you're spotted, so I feel like stealth does make a ton of sense here at least, so we're going to go with that. Next up, we're going to head straight over to Ranger. You can grab the cunning actions now if you like. In fact, that would actually be a perfectly good reason to go to Rogue 2 right away. However, I'm going to get into the Ranger levels first because that is what you guys are probably here for, so let's talk about it. Ranger is going to give us a ton of stuff. Like I say, we're going to get simple weapons and all martial weapons. We're going to get light armor, medium armor, and shields, as well as perception as a skill, although I think we do get to change that in a minute. So yeah, basically we're just now getting every single thing that we want, and even with the things like Favored Enemy and Natural Explorer, we can even pick up, if you go with Ranger Knight, you can get heavy armor here too, if you decide you want to go with that. I'm personally not going to get heavy armor on this build. I think medium armor makes a bit more sense for a dexterity-based build, but you can go with that if you like. So, let's talk about what Ranger's going to give us. Number one, we're going to get a Favored Enemy and Natural Explorer, like I just said, and obviously Bounty Hunter is a great option for us here. It's going to give us proficiency in investigation, which if maybe you're tracking monsters and such like that, you'd want a skill like this, as well as being able to give creatures who are hit with our Ensnaring Strike disadvantage on their saving throw against it, which means we are able to trap our enemies and prevent them from moving, which is going to be pretty solid for this build. But like I say, you could pick up any of these that you like. Sanctified Stalker would give you Sacred Flame. A good radiant attack would be good for taking on demons and devils. Ranger Knight obviously would give you heavy armor as well as history proficiency. Keeper of the Veil would also be an extremely on-theme one for this build, and I'll probably be taking this a bit later, because while it does give us proficiency in Arcana, which is okay, it also gives us protection from evil and good, which when you're fighting against demons makes sense, and it literally is for someone who specializes in hunting creatures from other planes of existence, which is Wyll's whole deal. So I would definitely pick this up if you want to stay true to the character. Next up, for Natural Explorer, you'd think someone who's going to be hunting after demons would want to pick up Wasteland Wanderer Fire in order to gain fire resistance, and you'd be absolutely right, but we are actually going to be getting fire resistance from a piece of equipment later on, so maybe you could take this at the start and then respec out of it later. So I'm for now going to be going with Wasteland Wanderer Cold because that's another pretty good option to resist. And then finally, we are going to get our proficiencies here. We're going to get Investigation because we took Bounty Hunter, which is great, as well as we get to pick one more. And honestly, I think Perception is a perfect choice for this build, so we're going to be sticking with that. Next up, at Ranger level 2, we are going to get to pick a fighting style, and of course we are a rapier-wielding character, just going for the pure kind of finesse gameplay, nothing in the offhand, not even a shield, so dual wielding is the way to go. You can... not dual wielding, sorry, dueling. Should not record videos right after I wake up. Anyways, dueling is going to allow us to add additional 2 damage to any weapon we use that is not two-handed or versatile, as long as we are using that in one hand. We are using a rapier with this build, so we're going to be getting off this damage bonus all the time. We can use a shield and still get this passive, however there's some other things that I want to use with this build that will require us to not use a shield anyway, so I feel like picking up dueling here is going to work out quite nicely for us. Next up, we do get to get 2 spells, and I think our choices here are pretty obvious. Ensnaring Strike, I've already made a case for. We definitely want this, allowing us to get a bit of battlefield control amongst everything else that we can do, as well as Hunter's Mark, which is probably going to end up being our main concentration spell for the build. While the Ensnaring Strike is nice for a little bit of battlefield control if you have this one enemy that keeps moving around the battlefield, otherwise Hunter's Mark is probably going to be the thing that you're going to want to concentrate on the most. It's going to add an additional 1d6 of slashing damage to your weapon attacks, and you can basically maintain concentration on this as much as you like, since again, this build isn't too concentration heavy as it doesn't focus too much on the spellcasting side of things, but again, you might have to pick between Ensnaring Strike and Hunter's Mark whenever you get around to it. And Hunter's Mark is going to fit into our kind of precision striking vibe, as that's going to add an additional 1d6 to attacks that we make. We're going to get some other features that are going to stack more damage on top of this as well, so this plus sneak attack is already going to do a bit of extra damage for us. That's about 2d6 so far. Or is it 3d6? I forget. I forget how sneak attack works. Pretty sure it's 2d6 at this point with Hunter's Mark on level 1 of Rogue, but I'm sure I'm wrong about that. Again, I've just woken up, please forgive me. Next up, we get to choose our subclass. Now, here's the thing. Obviously, I toiled with this for a while. Beastmaster, of course, would be a fun class to use. You'd get an animal companion. However, I don't really see Wyll running around with an animal companion. I don't know why. That kind of feels like just like maybe like a me thing, but I don't really see it. And especially with the multi-classing I want to do with this build, Beastmaster is not going to feel powerful enough. I could also see Gloomstalker and why people would want to go for that. Dread Ambusher feels really fun. It kind of fits with the rogue vibe that we're going for. You get Disguise Self. But if I'm being honest, I don't think it fits Wyll. I really, really don't. The whole point of Wyll at this point in the game is that he's moved past all of the kind of sticking to the shadows and using dark powers and all this and all that. And while Gloomstalker isn't necessarily tied to a Warlock Pact or anything like that, I do think it kind of doesn't really do Wyll justice as a character. Dread Ambusher is an amazing ability, yes, but it's pretty much the only thing I'd actually want from Gloomstalker mechanically. Because we get bonus action hide from the rogue levels that we're going to be taking. I don't really care about being invisible with this build, as well as Disguise Self just feels completely wrong for this build. The whole point of Wyll's character is that it doesn't matter now what he looks like, he's still going to put his best foot forward and be the hero of the people. Yes, he looks like a demon with his horns and his eyes and all that sort of thing, but hiding that aspect of himself now just feels wrong, and it goes against his character arc. I actually do not think Gloomstalker is a thematically appropriate choice for Wyll here. Which is why I'm going with Hunter. Hunter, it basically kind of fits Wyll's MO here. He becomes a monster hunter, a demon hunter, depending on your endings. His whole point is that he tracks things down, hunts them down to protect others. That is his whole thing. Technically, he was doing that before we even met him as well, and he continues to do that, but in a much better way after we part ways at the end of the game. I think Hunter makes perfect sense for Wyll for a multitude of reasons, and I think I've made my case as to why something while Gloomstalker is powerful, and could make more sense on maybe if he still had his Warlock Pact with Mizora, maybe a Warlock Gloomstalker builders in the future. That could be fun. But I think Hunter for this specific version of Wyll is the best choice. So, let's talk about it. We're going to get another spell at this level, and I am going to be taking Hail of Thorns, giving us a ranged attack. We are a ranger, might as well play into the stereotype a little bit. Next up, Hunter's Prey, and this is where it's going to get a bit fun. We can choose one of three. We can get Colossus Slayer, which allows us to, once per turn, deal an additional d8 of damage to a target if it is below its hit point maximum. Basically just one extra d8 of damage every turn, which is great. We could go for Giant Killer, so if we're up against a large or bigger creature, we can use our reaction to make a melee attack if it attacks us. It's okay. Unfortunately, I think large or bigger creatures are a bit too few and far between in a lot of the acts in this game for this to be really a worthwhile ability. And finally, Horde Breaker, allowing you to target two creatures standing close to each other, attacking them in quick succession. Absolutely would be on theme for Wyll, being able to quickly stab his rapier into two things with expert finesse. I do see why somebody would want to go with this one, but again, I do think it can be a bit situational, whereas Colossus Slayer fits the kind of mechanical vibe I'm going for, as well as being just the most general use case that can be used the most, because it's any creature that has less than its hit point maximum. So after you hit it once, you can use this ability right off the bat. So with Hunter's Mark being a 1d6, Sneak Attack being a 1d6, and this being a 1d8, in addition to all of our other weapon damage, we're doing a lot of damage with a single strike, which is pretty nice. So Colossus Slayer, in my opinion, is the way to go. Next up, at level 4, we are going to get to choose our first feat. Now, obviously, I would always recommend for your first feat being an ability score improvement into your main stat. For us, that is Dexterity at 18. I'll be coming back to this later, but let me show off the main feat option that I want to use here, and I think you guys probably already saw this coming. We're going with Defensive Duelist. When attacked while wielding a finesse weapon you are proficient with, you can use your reaction to add your proficiency bonus to your armor class, possibly causing the attack to miss. So we're going to come out of this build with a pretty decent armor class, around 22. That's without Defensive Duelist. Defensive Duelist is going to allow us to become basically almost like an unstoppable force, making it so with our proficiency bonus added on, it's going to be extremely hard for enemies to hit us. Yes, it costs our reaction, but we'll have a way of mitigating that kind of resource management as well. So Defensive Duelist, in my opinion, is going to be an extremely powerful feat for this build. So I would personally recommend picking this up maybe after getting your first feat. Defensive Duelist is definitely going to make us pretty awesome, because again, we're going to be dealing high burst damage thanks to all of our features stacked on top of each other, and then also being extremely defensive. While we're probably not going to be doing as much damage as like our Great Weapon Master build or something like that, the fact that we're able to balance offense and defense quite nicely here really feels more like a kind of Wyll build, and just a kind of rapier build in general. Defense, elegance, and precision hits. We get it all in one. Next up, at level 5, we're going to get access to extra attack, as well as we're going to start picking up level 2 spell slots, which means level 2 spells. Again, not too fussed about most of the kind of ranger spell options here, I must admit. Pass Without Trace, though, is going to be pretty nice, basically allowing us to give ourselves and all allies a +10 bonus to stealth checks. Again, if we're trying to sneak through the wastes of Avernus with a barbarian Karlach, we're going to want to make sure she can, you know, not be seen. So Pass Without Trace is actually going to really help us out here. I think it's a thematically appropriate kind of option for us, so I'm going to go with it. Next up at level 6, we're going to be able to choose another Favoured Enemy and Natural Explorer passive. Favoured Enemy will give us access to another one. Like I said earlier, you can pick up Sacred Flame from Sanctified Stalker, Heavy Armour Proficiency from Ranger Knight. Don't pick Magebreaker, but again, to be on theme for this build, we're going to pick up Keeper of the Veil, which I already made a case for earlier because I do think it is the most thematic choice. Next up for Natural Explorer, let's pick up that Wasteland Wanderer Poison. Of course, you could get Beast Tamer if you want Fine Familiar, but I personally don't see many uses for it. Urban Tracker can also be great if you want Proficiency in Sleight of Hand, since we did not take it earlier. That's entirely up to you if you want to grab that. I personally like just getting the Poison Resistance here so that we have Cold, Fire, and Poison Resistance by the time this build is all said and done, which is, again, resisting quite a few damage types is always nice. So that's my personal pick, but choose whatever you like. Next up, at Ranger level 7, we're going to get access to something that I think is really going to make this build a lot more fun. But first, let's talk about the spells. Choose whatever spell you like. Spike Growth can be a decent chunk of battlefield control if you want to go that route. I think it could work quite nicely. Enhanced Sleep, though, and/or Longstrider can both be extremely useful here. Entirely up to you what you want to pick, just grab a utility option. Hell, if you want some healing, pick up Cure Wounds. That could actually be quite useful in this game, in my personal opinion, and again, could be fitting to kind of like have some combat medic expertise, again, if you're, you know, this Avernus Hunter or whatever. Entirely up to you what you want to grab here. Like I say, this build is pretty free-flowing when it comes to the spell choice. Just pick your preference. Honestly, it's entirely up to you. But here's what I really wanted to come to this high of a level in Ranger 4. We have 3 defensive tactics, again, blending that idea of powerful, precise offense and elegant defense, so we get to choose a defensive option here. We have Escape the Horde, meaning that opportunity attacks against us have disadvantage. We're going to have the ability to disengage as a bonus action by the time we're finished with this build, so I don't see this one being too useful. Steel Will, again, is also nice, giving you advantage on saving throws against being frightened, but again, probably not something I would pick up. Again, while it has a lot of use cases in this game, it is still a bit niche, so I'm personally not going to be choosing that one. The real one I'm here for is Multi-Attack Defense. When an enemy attacks you, they have a -4 penalty to additional attack rolls against you until the start of their next turn. What? So, in the later acts of the game, where a lot of enemies have extra attack and multi-attack and all this stuff, being able to inflict a -4 penalty on their attack rolls against you, with our high AC and defensive duelist allowing us to dodge that initial attack as well, we're basically going to be unhittable, for the most part, when it works. And when it works, it does work. Obviously, some enemies will just have really high attack rolls, or sometimes you'll get critical hit, but again, you can mitigate that as well. But between stacking like all of these defensive features while still being able to pack on the power, I really like the whole theme of this build and how it comes together. So, multi-attack defense is going to be my choice here. I was actually thinking of maybe doing a Hunter Ranger Paladin build that kind of focuses on the Radiating Orb stuff plus multi-attack defense, with a piece of gear that prevents critical hits against you, like to just really pack on that defensive utility. Because with Radiating Orb and multi-attack defense plus being unable to be crit, I don't think you can even ever get hit. So maybe I'll show that build off in the future, perhaps as a bonus video. And next up, Ranger level 8, or you could start going into level 2 of Rogue here. Because here's the thing, it depends on whether or not you want 3 feats on this build or not. You can either go to range at 8 for 3 feats, allowing you to pick up Defensive Duelist as a feat, plus 2 ability score improvements, which is what I did in testing, which I quite liked. However, if you go to Rogue level 5, you would be able to get an extra damage die on your sneak attacks, as well as being able to pick up Evasion, which would give you advantage on dex saves against spells and such like that. So I think either or could be quite good for this build. Again, you could be a bit more defensive, or you could go for that feat for a bit more offense. Entirely up to you. I'm going to be picking up 3 feats with this build, just because that's what I did in testing, and it seemed to work out a bit better. But if you wanted to go for that kind of flavour of going for a 7-5 split, you absolutely could, because I do think it would work. So, let's pick up this level 8 feat, and of course, an ability score improvement here. Again, you would have done this already if you'd done the level order that I said, but again, I like to show off the feats earlier in the build because these videos are quite long. So, bump up that dexterity. But I don't personally see a reason to go to range at level 9 with this build. The only level 3 spell I would ever want is Conjure Barrage, but I honestly think that we would do other stuff instead with our turn most of the time, so I think it's just good from this point on. We're going to go into Rogue. Again, Rogue level 2 is going to give us the Cunning Actions, which I've already gone over. Now, next up, we get to choose our subclass, and honestly, any subclass would work here. Thief obviously would be the most powerful option, and is what I went with in testing, because it gives us an extra bonus action which can play into certain mechanics that I'll get into in a minute. But Arcane Trickster would give you more spell slots, as well as some extra cantrips and utility spells to play around with, if you so choose. Shield would be excellent on this build from the expanded spell list, and honestly would probably be the main thing you use your spell slots on, other than Hunter's Mark, so I could personally recommend that right off the bat. That alone would be worth the Arcane Trickster dip, as well as getting some spells perhaps like Charm Person. I don't know, these spells aren't too great honestly, especially when we've dumped Intelligence, and maybe some utility cantrips like Friends could be really nice, or Minor Illusion or something like that. But the main thing would be Shield, and honestly, maybe while that would be powerful on a build like this, perhaps it's not worth a whole multi-class just for that. You would get more spell slots though for your you would actually get up to level 3 spell slots for your ranger spells if you wanted to go with that way, so you could get a couple of more spell slots before the day is done, but that's entirely up to you. And then there's Assassin, which would also work quite nicely, giving you the ability to gain advantage on attack rolls against creatures that haven't taken a turn yet. That's always nice. You would get successful critical, you gain guaranteed crits on any surprise creature, as well as regaining your action and bonus action at the start of combat. There's a lot of reasons why Assassin could be good, but I personally am going to be going with Thief here, but I think there's honestly a case for any of these, so just choose your favourite. But Thief is going to allow us to do some shenanigans with equipment later, so that's what I'm going to be going with. And finally, at Rogue level 4, final level of the build, we do get to take another ability score improvement, and I'm going to use this opportunity to bump up our dexterity to the maximum. And that is the build. Overall, what you're going to be getting out of this is a pretty solid attacking and defensive character. You're going to gain access to multiple ways of stacking additional damage onto your attacks through Sneak Attack, Colossus Slayer, and Hunter's Mark. You're going to gain a ton of defensive utility from Defensive Duelist, high AC thanks to our high dexterity, the ability to disengage as a bonus action as well, and other things as well, like, well, I mean, you got all the defensive stuff you really need. You're going to have a lot of the offensive and defensive options with this build, making it a great all-rounder that I personally think fits Wyll's playstyle extremely well. So, let's get into the equipment so I can show you the rest of what I mean. Now, this build, obviously, with its focus on offense and defense, I decided to make it so that we have options for both when it comes to the equipment. So let's get into it. First up, our main weapon that you'll be obtaining by the end of the game is the Duelist's Prerogative. If we're making a rapier build, let's go for the best rapier in the game. This is a legendary +3 sword that comes with so many benefits, it's honestly insane that they put all of this on a single weapon. While this is in your main hand and your offhand is completely empty, which is obviously why I'm not using a shield, you score a critical hit when rolling a 19 or lower, and moreover, you gain an additional reaction per turn. So that is a second reaction that we can use for Defensive Duelist, opportunity attacks, and sneak attack stuff, and all that other stuff, which is great. And on a hit with a melee weapon, you can use a reaction to deal an additional necrotic damage equal to your proficiency bonus, in addition to the 1d4 of necrotic that this weapon just does by default. That alone would be an amazing ability, but it comes with two more things. You're going to get challenged to a duel, forcing an enemy to attack only you and inflicting bleeding on them. Bleeding, of course, does a little bit of slashing damage at the start of every turn, and the enemy has disadvantage on con saving throws, so it's great against spellcasters. And then you also just gain a bonus action attack that you can use every turn. Since we have 2 bonus actions with Thief Rogue, while we can still only use this once per turn, that means we basically get another attack each turn. Then we also still just have a bonus action that we can use for anything else, which is absolutely insane. And as you can see, we're getting a +10 bonus to the damage modifier here, which is already great, as well as the +1d4 necrotic, giving us a pretty solid amount of damage here. Overall, this weapon is incredible and feels like a perfect kind of end-game weapon for Wyll, which is why I wanted to recommend it here. But of course, this is an Act 3 option, so if you want some early-game options, we've got a couple. For Act 1, the Rupturing Blade would feel pretty on point. It's a +1, pretty standard rapier that comes with a unique attack called Searing Blood, allowing you to deal a little bit of extra fire damage, a bit of extra piercing damage, but you also take a bit of slashing damage yourself. But once per short rest, it's pretty worth it. Quite a fun ability overall. But of course, when you get to Act 2, you can pick up the Infernal Rapier, which is Wyll's rapier from when he was working under Misora. I don't see any reason he would particularly discard this right away, as it is a pretty powerful weapon, but I think once he picks up the Duelist Prerogative and dumps the Infernal Rapier, it will be his chance to move on. But hey, this one still is pretty good. You gain a +1 bonus to your spell save DC, and instead of your dexterity modifier, the affected entity uses its spellcasting ability modifier to attack rolls. So if you wanted to focus more on the ranger spellcasting side of things, rather than your dexterity, you can actually just use this weapon instead and go for 20 wisdom instead of 20 dexterity. I personally would not recommend that, as I do think you'll be switching off of this weapon pretty quickly, but it is an option there, as well as you get the ability to summon a Cambion as well, which can always be useful. But of course, the Duelist Prerogative is our end game, because it's honestly one of the most busted weapons in the game. All of the legendary weapons are pretty busted, and this one definitely is no exception. As for your ranged weapon, this is kind of a free kind of slot. Any bow, short bow, hand crossbow, heavy crossbow will work. I decided to go for the Hellfire Engine crossbow here because it gets you Lightning Arrow, which is kind of a rangery spell. And while Wyll as a ranger can use longbows, I think he would be more of a crossbow guy. If I was being perfectly honest, I do think he would use maybe just like a single hand crossbow personally. That feels like the closest to what the kind of vibe is for me. But I've gone with a heavy crossbow here just because it gives us a bit of extra power. Like I say, we get that lightning arrow, as well as this one in particular comes with the reposition malefactor, which is like a grappling hook that can pull allies to safety or pull enemies towards you for melee range stuff. So I think that works quite nicely for Wyll, kind of fits the whole Avernus vibe as well. But any bow, longbow, shortbow will work here. The Darkfire shortbow could be nice. The Gonta-mail, obviously, the dead shot, anything could work here. Even the Jolt Shooter for lightning charges could be fun, so feel free to pick whatever you like here, but I've just gone with this as like a generic option to remind me to discuss ranged weapons, because of course you can use them on this build. Hell, even the Hellfire hand crossbow could be a really fun one as well with this build, with like the burning and such like that. So yeah, feel free to use whatever you like in this slot. The Hellfire Engine crossbow is just a solid endgame option that you could just pick up anyway, so there you go. Next up, moving on to the equipment, we have the Helm of Baldur, another legendary piece of equipment. Now, the reason I've decided to go with this is because, obviously, if we're playing like to a canon Wyll, who perhaps as well saves his father, if we're looking at the most positive outcome here, you would definitely learn of the existence of Ansur below Baldur's Gate, and would probably go and fight him in your journey, meaning that you would pick up the Helm of Baldur at some point. And who else other than the folk hero, the Blade of Frontiers, the Blade of Avernus, the Hunter of Frontiers, the legendary hero Wyll, to inherit the Helm of Baldur himself. This, I think it makes perfect sense for Wyll to pick this up and wear it, and I'll be honest, I usually don't like the look of this weapon, this helm, but I actually think with Wyll's horns sticking out of it, it actually kind of works. I would probably colour it a bit differently to make it fit the rest of the armour, but this is the first time I would ever say this helm actually looks pretty good, but I like to hide helms anyway, so I'm just going to do that, but I do think that could work. So, with the Helm of Baldur, it's going to come with a ton of benefits. The helmet heals you for 2 points at the beginning of every turn. That's going to synergize with some other equipment that I've picked up. You also have a +1 bonus to armor class and saving throws. Always great. You cannot be stunned. Amazing. But finally, attacks cannot land critical hits on the wearer. That is incredible, because what that is going to do for us, like I say, because we're boosting up our AC so high and reducing our enemy's chance to hit, making it so we are never critical hit, basically means we're never going to be attacked, or at least we're not going to be attacked for massive damage, which is awesome. So picking up this is going to be extremely helpful. Now, I've not put on a cloak here purely for fashion reasons. However, the Cloak of Derivation, which, yeah, there's probably a better color scheme somewhere here, the Cloak of Displacement, sorry, could actually be extremely important. At the beginning of the wearer's turn, the cloak activates, granting enemies disadvantage on attack rolls that target the wearer. This effect lasts until the wearer takes damage. That's kind of insane, at least to me, because not only is our AC extremely high and we have a ton of ways of reducing our enemy's chance to hit, they now have disadvantage on those attack rolls as well, which is absolutely busted. I did not use this in my testing, but if I did, I barely would have been hit. I honestly actually need to do that Hunter Ranger Paladin build that uses the Radiant Gear and this, and just make a completely invincible build, because that would be pretty insane. Let me know if you want to see that. Anyways, taking that off for now, but it would obviously be an extremely powerful option. Next up, the Unwanted Masterwork Scale Mail. This is Karlach's beta armor that kind of became the default template for all of the kind of Avernus armor that everyone wears in the endgame. It adds our full dexterity modifier to our armor class, which is great, and does not impose disadvantage on stealth ability checks. Perfect armor for this build in every single way possible. It also gives us resistance to fire damage. How could I not use it on this build? You don't have to use this armor. In fact, you can kind of pick up a different armor set if you like, but I had to use this one because it just makes too much sense for this build. It's thematic, it's perfect, it shows a kind of like a team up with Karlach and all that. It kind of it just reflects so much of Wyll's development. I love it so much. He goes from wanting to hunt down Karlach and kill her to being one of her greatest allies, even inheriting her armor. Like, chef's kiss, I love it. But of course, end game option, a solid mid game option would be the 1T scale mail, which I also think looks quite good on Wyll, which basically does everything the same, except instead of fire resistance, it gives us a little bonus to our initiative rolls. Pretty good armor for the mid game, so I would recommend picking it up. Next up, our gloves, the Reviving Hands, which seems like a bit of a weird choice. Whenever you heal a creature, it gains the effects of Blade Ward, and whenever you revive a creature, it gains the effect of Death Ward. You get a +1 to strength saving throws, and the ability to cast Revivify once per long rest. Why on earth would I choose this for Wyll? Doesn't make much sense. We don't even have a healing spell. I mean, we could have taken Cure Wounds earlier, which would work with this, so maybe do that. But here's the thing. The self-healing from the Helm of Baldur will apply Blade Ward to ourselves, meaning that every single turn we gain resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage through Blade Ward, making us so even when we do get hit, we don't take nearly as much damage, which to me, it might be overkill, but once I saw that this little combination worked, I really wanted to show it off, because it really does help the survivability of this build, where we do have slightly lower HP. So, me, personally, I think this is just great. I love it, I think it's perfect, but you can choose whatever you like for this slot. It's honestly not going to matter. Any of the kind of end game kind of armor pieces for the gloves will just work just fine, but I really wanted to show off that little combination, because I think it's going to be seriously fun for the build. But again, Act 3 option. An early game option would be the Gloves of the Duelist, which would basically, while you just are wielding the rapier in one hand, you'll gain a +2 bonus to your attack rolls. Pretty standard piece of kit that's just going to carry you over until you get the big boy stuff. So that works for us here. Now for the boots, you have two options depending entirely on what you want to go for. If you want more offense, go for the Line Breaker boots. Once per turn, whenever you dash, you gain Wrath for 2 turns. Now at the moment, that is not an accurate description of how these boots work. There is no once per turn restriction, and you actually gain 3 turns of Wrath. For those of you that don't know what Wrath does, I featured it on the channel before, but this is just, I'll just catch people up to speed. Wrath gives you a +1 bonus to damage with melee weapons for every turn that this condition has remaining. So, because we're a Thief Rogue who can dash 2 times as a bonus action, we can get a total of +6 to our melee weapon damage on the first turn of combat, which is insane. And it goes up to 7 stacks, so you can actually have a +17 to the damage rolls total with everything said and done with these boots and the other bonuses that we have. That's absolutely bonkers, and you can, and even though you lose a charge of Wrath every turn, you can just use one of our 2 bonus actions to just dash again and keep it at the max, also giving you that great maneuverability. And as you kind of get into the kind of combo kind of rotation of this build, you're always going to have a bonus action free, so there's no reason not to dash, so you might as well always do it. So that is a +7 additional damage fitting into that kind of precision attack sort of stuff, added on with the 1d8 from Colossus Slayer, the extra sneak attack damage, the Hunter's Mark damage. You're going to be doing a lot of damage with this build. Again, enemies that resist piercing damage might give you a bit of trouble, but otherwise, damn, this build can really, really shred. However, if you want a more defensive option, you actually have the Acrobat Shoes. The Acrobat Shoes would, while not giving you that extra power, would give you advantage on dexterity saving throws. Because yes, we've made our AC really high and attack rolls against us are basically not going to hit. However, we're still subject to area of effects spells, which is why going for that 5th level of Rogue and maybe instead of that 8th level of Ranger would giving you the evasion ability might actually really help here. However, gaining advantage on dexterity saving throw checks is another great way to kind of prevent taking those massive amounts of damage from things like Fireball. So that could be an option if you also want to go the defensive route. Both of these boots are obtainable really early in the game in Act 1, so either one of these playstyles can come online super early. I personally prefer the Linebreaker boots because it just gives us that offensive capability that this build really loves, but that extra defensive utility can be seriously great, especially when we get into the equipment, the accessories even, because we're using the Risky Ring. Now, the Risky Ring is going to give us advantage on all attack rolls, meaning that we can use Sneak Attack whenever we like, barring some fringe conditions like in being ensnared. However, we do receive disadvantage on all saving throws. Now, we're pretty good at saving throws overall, but things like the Acrobat Shoes giving us advantage on dexterity checks, cancelling out that debuff could be really important, as well as my necklace of choice, the Fey Semblance Amulet, giving us advantage on intelligence, wisdom, and charisma saving throws. Again, advantage and disadvantage cancel each other out to make it neutral. So all that the Fey Semblance Amulet here is giving us neutral, so just regular rolls on our mental saving throws, as well as the Acrobat Shoes would give us that neutral roll on the dexterity saving throws, meaning that strength and constitution are going to have disadvantage. Yes, that sucks for when we want to use Hunter's Mark, but again, there are kind of ways you can get around it. And again, because of the fact that we're barely going to be getting hit with the amount of AC stacking that we're going to be doing, our constitution saving throws aren't actually that big of a deal. So that I'm not too worried about. Strength saving throws would be the only kind of thing that could give us some real trouble. Otherwise, we've pretty much nullified the disadvantages of the Risky Ring with this build, meaning that we can just gain advantage on every single attack roll, which means there's more chances to crit, and obviously Sneak Attack on every attack, which is nice. And finally, also synergizing with our self-healing every turn, we have the Whispering Promise, giving us Bless, which gives us a plus d4 bonus to attack rolls and saving throws every single turn, because it's whenever we heal a creature we gain that buff, and since we heal ourselves every turn, we're constantly blessed. Meaning that now we also have an extra 1d4 bonus to saving throws as well, which means, yeah, the Risky Ring's downside basically is non-existent on this build, and an additional bonus to our attack rolls, meaning that we're pretty much always going to hit. This build comes together so nicely. I think all of the equipment synergizes amazingly together. We're going to get this awesome, we got the awesome theme that I was looking for here. I think it fits Wyll's kind of vibe perfectly. Everything works together amazingly. So yeah, that is the build, and honestly, as far as these what if builds go, it's probably one of my favorites. It's definitely the one I'm probably most proud of overall. While my other what if builds like the Vampire Hunter for Astarion, the Hero build for Karlach, this Monk build for Lae'zel, they're all fine. They kind of just fell back into like typical build making tropes, like obviously making Karlach a freaking paladin sorcerer is going to be strong. Lae'zel as a full open hand monk is just powerhouse material anyway. Like, but this build achieves a similar level of power, but also balances it with defensive utility in a way that feels extremely appropriate to the character's development, as well as being fun and unique to play as well. I personally love how this turned out. I think it is just an amazingly fun build for those of you who want to just play something a bit different again, and it captures the like vibe of like again, whenever I think of Wyll, I think of his introductory cutscene where he's like, he dances in, you know, jumps on down, and it's like basically almost like Bard like in his approach, which again, while I didn't go with Bard here, I've made Wyll a Bard before multiple times, as I do just think it captures that vibe so well. But I also honestly think that I got it here, and again, getting a basically, like I said before, a canon class change to work so well with the character. Oh, I love it. This is one of my favorite builds I've done by far. I think, and I really like Wyll as a character anyway, so I think this just all ties together in a nice, pretty package. Anyways, not much else really to say here at the end of the video, because I'm kind of just recording this first thing on a Sunday morning, so I can just have the rest of the day to relax. So I'm going to cut things off here. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.